Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus Medina, and I'm going to show you how to organize your papers from brainstorm maps to outlines in the most time effective and stress free way. Follow me. Now, what you're looking at is considered to be a brainstorm map. There are multiple bubbles, and each bubble has its own function to help a writer become successful. Now, you do not only need to use these for writing, but you can use these for planning your scripts. You can use these for planning out or mapping out a pathway for success. As long as there's an objective, it will go here, and then there are details to explain that objective. You will be very successful. But we're going to apply this to writing papers, especially for essays and for research papers. Now, one of the things that you do not want to do at any stage is write sentences. You want to avoid sentences at all costs. There are other things that you'll also need to avoid as well, and we'll talk about these things more extensively in the do's and nots, do and don'ts for brainstorm mapping. But let's go ahead and take a look. And also, um, make sure that you bear with me now because this is my first time doing this. And this may also be marking the beginning of my episode. So keep that in mind that while I also do have a plan for making this, I want to also be somewhat real with you in the sense where there are always changes of plans, but you always want to have a really good structure, a foundation for your planning, and that's what we're here for. Now, the first thing that you'll notice, you'll see at the top of your organization um, bubble, at least your brainstorm map is what we're going to refer to this as. And let me go ahead and activate my laser here, is the main idea. If you take a look, you see the main idea. You'll see three blue bubbles with capital MDs in all caps. This means major detail. And then you'll see some smaller MDs. These are minor details. Now, I made it this way and used these acronyms to this size so that it's easy to determine what words or ideas and details belong to which part. Now, just imagine that this was a web and then you have these lines working from here down, right? There's these levels, these steps. Some bubbles belong to others. They don't belong, like this bubble does not belong to the other two major details, but the major details belong to the main ideas. This is what we call the path of relevancy and a path of reference, right? So all at once. Next, we're going to also make sure that you understand that the biggest idea starts first, then you support that idea second, and then you need to explain or provide examples third. This is how you successfully create the pathway for your thoughts. Now, on essays and paragraphs, we often want to make sure that we have enough information to show that we understand something or we want our readers to understand. In some cases, this bubble can be just as easy as having one major detail and two minor details because every paragraph has at least, uh, I would say, four sentences at best for someone to understand a general topic. Okay, why not three? Why not two sentences per paragraph? The reason why these are not as effective is that either it doesn't give enough explanations or examples, or it doesn't, the sentence might have like maybe, let's say, three major details, which is fine. Um, Quite simply, we'll talk about putting these into practice. But for now, we're just talking about the planning phase. But just by having only three, you still do not have enough information to show that you understand the topic. Minor details are present to show that you understand specific information rather than general information. And again, Our most specific information comes at the bottom. Our most general information comes at the top, right? So, our general information, for example, you might use strong keywords. Um, Strong keywords would be like parents, and then major details will break down the parent by gender. So you either have a mother or you have a father. Okay, you have mom and dad, for example. Mom will take up one of the major detail bubbles, and dad will take the second major detail bubble. Of course, if you're talking about your household, your parents or whatever, and you're like the only child, you will be one of those bubbles as well. Now, you will usually tell us a sentence about your mother first. We usually go by the phonetics. So, which one is easier to say, mom or dad? I'll talk about my mom, right? So, we'll talk about mom first, mother first, and then we'll give her a name, okay? So, for example, let's say that my mother's name is Cindy, and then my father's name is Charles, okay? So, at least in those bubbles, we would at least acknowledge information or reveal information. I wouldn't do it this way on a more specific pathway. I would put mom Cindy, dad Charles in the major detail bubbles, but let's just pretend like we're practicing basic sentences here. Okay, and then of course you might have Marcus here. Okay, so um, this is the best way to sort of plan out what you want to say. I'm going to talk about my family. Family is going to be in the general, somewhat in the general space. My family, which includes myself and my parents. Now, in the next sentence, you'll talk about your mother first. My mother is a beautiful person. End of the sentence. Next sentence, her name is Cindy. Next, my father is a strong person. Then in the next sentence, you can say, my dad is very strong. Or my dad's name is Martial, sorry, or Charles. Just gave away my father's name, and that's okay. That's his nickname. So we can say here again, my father is strong. His name is Charles. And then, of course, we have here, and finally, you're going to talk about yourself. So finally, there's me. Um, you could say something like, I am smart and I like to build things like my father. You can say that in a minor detail, or you can just reveal your name. My name is Marcus, and I love to build things like my father. Right. So that's basically a somewhat semi-detailed example of a brainstorm map and where to go next. Now, let's take a look at the brainstorm map tag. Okay. So when we're writing in paragraphs within an essay, it becomes totally different because unlike a basic paragraph where you're just writing one particular topic sentence and a few sentences after to express an idea. In the essay, you need to do this 3 times, right? We say 3 times so that we can, just like in the previous brainstorm map, you try to get your readers to understand more details so that we can understand more about your topic, right? So let's pretend like you have this times 3, right? Main idea 1, main idea 2, main idea 3. And for each bubble, you'll need something like evidence. As you can see, main idea becomes your reason, event, or step, and then you need to provide evidence. And this is only when you need to cite something. And I'll talk about citations in another video. But for now, let's pretend like we're writing towards, like, say, research papers. You always want to give your general idea first. What is the whole idea, okay, of your topic? Your topic could be something like if you're writing about the human discovery that changed the world, then you will say something like the event, the weapon changed the world by making survival easier for humankind, right? And then, or you can add a little bit to it. Weapons during the Paleolithic age, or millions of years ago during the Paleolithic age, weapons made survival easier for humankind. There you go. A simple sentence that does not explain everything because you want the rest of the paragraph to work for you. According to whatever source that you're writing about, you've probably read from a newspaper, an article, um, online, or you probably read from a textbook. So you can say, according to Glencoe's World History, sixth edition. You don't actually have to say sixth edition. Pretty much your bibliography or works cited will say that, but you can say according to a book's name. Then you start explaining. You can either directly copy and paste it and keep the integrity of the sentence and quotations, or without quotations, you can paraphrase into your own words. So, for example, let's say, according to the American pageant, or according to Glencoe's World History, humans founded clubs as a weapon to, and then you can talk about maybe a weapon that stops animals or captures animals, something of that nature, right? And then, of course, in the next line, you have two more sentences. So you might branch off into two, or you might just branch off into one more sentence. This is your minor detail. It's an explanation of the evidence. So we talk about how the humans created the club, or what the club was made out of. So we can say, if you're doing something like an event, you're talking about history, the sentence should be something like, we can say, humans crafted clubs by using the bones of animal legs, and maybe something like the strong portion of the animal legs, or the strong lower portion of the animal legs, to increase its mobility and power, basically. And then you can make the next sentence a little bit more, add a little bit more information that they use the clubs um, to bludgeon the animal's head. They also use the weapon to build other weapons, to break rocks or other structures, to retune a weapon, or sharpen, use like smaller rocks that come out of like shells, to cut meat or something like that. So they created more weapons using this tool, further than just say killing animals, but we can add that sentence in there. Now, you can also provide examples for other things, like maybe you want to explain how the weapon was, or explain what the weapon was used for, and then talk about how did they make the weapon. They used bones, and they compacted maybe several bones together. Or we can use a for example sentence. So you can say, for example, and then from the source, of course, is where you get this information. All that reading that you do will provide you the examples that humans use clubs, or how they use the club for a particular thing. The transition usually starts from the previous sentence. So if you were to talk about making more weapons, we can say, for example, scientists determined that in a certain museum, that a particular weapon was used for creating the I would say maybe the arrowhead, or something like that, or smashing several rocks found in I would say Neolithic caves in Berlin, or something like that. And then, of course, you can go off to adding the conclusion of that sentence, right? For like maybe how many years was it used, or how significant it was, or maybe you saw, or maybe you understand the reference from a movie, a famous movie that was being used. Like, for example, in Disney's Caveman Go, just making up a name here, hypothetically speaking, the caveman Neuron, or whatever you want to call him, carries a club that is similar to the prehistoric man, or you can talk about the Flintstones or something like that, right? So just added information to sort of create a discussion. So that's what that is used for. Okay. One thing that you want to also maintain is the color. Okay. Just like here in the previous page, the main idea is going to be yellow, the major detail is going to be blue, and the minor detail is going to be green, and we try to keep it a straight green. And as you can see, you have the cyan colors, the turquoise colors, or maybe like light blue will work for additional minor details. And the reason why we want to keep the additional minor details this color is so that you don't confuse it with the other bubbles on the page, like the ones that you're using evidence in your explanations for. Remember, this is considered a set. You can disregard this part to create a complete paragraph, or you can use both. The more details, the better understanding that you have, but it doesn't mean that you understand it better than someone who can say the same thing in 4 sentences. So keep this in mind. The thing that we do want to keep is consistency across the board. Some students and some teachers, some writers may prefer changing a color to something they like. But if you really want to, um, you know, have peer editing work with you before the actual writing stage, it's always best to sort of highlight or color in on free form, so to say, uh, a bubble like this, so that way the standard will help everybody understand what's going on. I use yellow because it's a pretty loud color. It's the standard highlight color. It's the color that we use the most in books. And I designate this one as, not just the most important thing that we need to understand, but the main thing we need to understand, the main thing we need to look at, right? And then in the same sense, when you're going over paragraphs, don't highlight every single thing, just highlight the key words, the thing that you actually can remember when you close the book. The other, of course, blue, is kind of like a major calm down. It is a darker color, but using a blue, or maybe even if it is a sky blue, this is totally fine. You can single underline your words and double underline your evidence keywords, the words that you want to port over maybe into the main idea of the actual topic, so to say. But when you're grading papers or checking papers for the presence of evidence, use double underline to acknowledge that, okay, you do have this very important sentence there. This legitimizes your argument or your research. And then, of course, for the others, you do not need to double or triple underline or anything, but I will highlight this one in green, and maybe for this one, you can kind of leave these alone without a color to show that they're just additional sentences on the paper. And this is when you're highlighting on the paper, okay? Not, this is not when you're, I would say when you're working a brainstorm map. But when you're working a brainstorm map, keep these colors here, okay? Remember that this is a complete set, and altogether it indicates a complete thought. Now think, after you're done, do you have an explanation? Do you have only ideas? Try reading your brainstorm from one direction, and then, so this will be pathway 1, 2, 3, then you go 4, 5. Okay. Try reading your brainstorm map like a speech, right? This way you can double check to see if it makes sense, right? Make sure that you're not repeating words, right? And then do the same thing again. Explain, provide your 2 sentences, and then give an example and provide your additional sentence. Now, this, of course, is a 2-set. Major details, so you have 1 main idea and 2 sets of evidence, or maybe 2 sets of references from maybe your source if you're doing literature, 2 quotes from the book, whether it's direct or indirect. This is a 2-set, okay? Now, I would recommend to fill in these bubbles with only 2 to 4 strong keywords or phrases, okay? And I will show you in a future video when it comes to actually putting this into practice, what I'm talking about. But yes, when you're planning anything in the brainstorm app, never exceed 4 words or phrases. And phrases, I mean, are short words together that mean something. Like, for example, you wouldn't say school teacher, but you can just say teacher, right? You keep the word that is the strongest word. If you want to designate school teacher, maybe put that in the idea box before and say teacher in the next box so we can indicate, okay, in a school, you have teachers and you have students, okay? And yes, you can do it that way, but don't say school teacher or school student unless you really have to, right? Maybe when you're doing my family, yes, you can say university student instead of school student. You can say high school student, HS student, MS student for middle school. Keep your acronyms short and avoid certain words, but don't exceed. Try not to exceed 4 words if at all costs, right? Because the point is to save time by planning as fast as possible and without the need to remember or memorize details before you're actually writing. When you're actually writing papers, you'll probably have something called writer's block. But it's worse to have writer's block when you're not prepared and you don't know which ideas or details you're going to use on the paper. It's worse to have writer's block then than to have it with a plan. Because if you have it with a plan, at least the only problems that you have is which words am I going to choose, right? And then you can probably use like a dictionary or something to gather more words to make sure that your meanings are straight, or you can find synonyms to cover the blank spots. But in terms of the brainstorm map, every keyword should be very strong, should progress to the next idea or detail, again, without repeating words, but introducing something new so that your sentences have something different to talk about each step of the way. Also, consider this: giving your brainstorm map to someone to read who is probably also equally good as you or more practiced than you, like a teacher, like a literature teacher, a writing teacher, an English teacher. They should be able to understand what you're going to write about on the entire paper just by looking at your brainstorm map. Bosses with a lot of experience at a particular job, they will know what you're talking about if they see the presence of strong keywords in your plan. They'll say, okay, they'll assume, okay, so you want to do this, and the way that you're going to do it is this way and that way, right? And then how do you know it's going to work, or how can you explain how it works, and can you give me an example? The bosses will be able to know how to do this because they have experience doing a similar thing in the past. All right, so now we're going to talk about the outline. So the brainstorm map will later become an outline. What an outline is basically a more developed planning stage, step by step, of all the accepted ideas and details that were presented in your brainstorm map, but now you offer a little bit more clarity. Another thing you notice is that there's a hook. So general key details of what you're going to introduce. You can say history of slavery, if you're talking about, let's say your topic is about Jim Crow, for example, the history of Jim Crow, you'll probably talk about slavery first in your hook, and then for the context, you'll talk about Reconstruction, post-slavery Reconstruction, and maybe segregation of states, states from former CSA, aka Confederate States of America. You'll probably talk about that background and, of course, the rise of blacks in particular cities and townships. And then your thesis statement, which we'll also talk about building at another time. This is the most important sentence on your paper because it lets readers know what you're going to talk about, what you're going to write about. It's the purpose of your paper, and without it, you have something worthless here. So let's say on a research paper outline, if you're in the 7th or 8th grade, you're going to have an outline as big as this. Anything before this, anything other than this is usually a lightweight assignment, and you can refer to the brainstorm map to carry you over to the paper. But if something like a research paper requires a lot more planning, not a little, but a lot more planning, because you want to make sure that you successfully explain particular events, steps, or reasons for something being done, and then of course providing evidence and so on and so forth. Things that you might have a hard time remembering again if you have no plan. You'll say something like, "Oh, I want to write this paper. I want it to be like this." Now, notice that these sections here, they are sectioned by three main parts. One, you have the introduction, the main body, and conclusion. These parts never really change. While everything else gets filled out, you won't see these words on an actual outline that is built. It will be replaced by your keywords that you want to say. You just keep in mind that section A under each main section, for example, they have their own functions, okay? And sometimes you don't need hook or context for essays, you just need the thesis statement. So if you're writing an essay, you know what you're going to talk about, you probably won't include these, but it's best if you do, if you have a hard time remembering or being creative at the start, okay? Sometimes I like to use historical anecdotes, and we'll talk about introductions, introduction making, plus thesis statement making at another time. But when you move down to the main body, you'll also have to consider this. These things must be done right away. So the main idea from the brainstorm map will carry over here, and the major detail bubble will carry over here, and then so on and so forth, right? You have the minor details and additional minor details, okay? So after you add these, make sure you add additional words. I'll talk about how many words will fit on these lines total in order to make a good paper, okay? Remember to keep the order, the descending order of section A to subsection 1 because you already have a section 2 and a 1 here. Then you have subsection A, which follows under 1. So you can say section 2A, subsection 1A. And then you have an index here. We see these like on index pages, which is somewhat, I would say, kind of like additional information or really small information. We call this super specific information, right? Because you go from general to maybe quotation or specific, then you go to more specific and most specific. And you only really need to go this far on any kind of essay, right? So, yeah, you probably, and this would be an extended essay, but regular essays, normal essays where you only need like 4 sentences, you might only need fewer lines to fill, okay? But you need those lines, okay? So in essays, notice there are major details. You might have 3 major details and no minor details, but again, this is not a, I would say a detailed paragraph, right? It's only mostly detailed when you have specific information, right? Also, keep in mind that you'll need a conclusion section, right? You're restating the purpose of your paper, just like in the introduction, but you're going to just change maybe the order of the words. You're just reminding the reader what they've read. And also you might even include some final thoughts or maybe some post notes of what happened after that particular time. So keep that in mind. Remember to outline first, create your outlines first, and then draft second. And then finally is the keyword count. So in some other sections, you're not going to, you can put as much as you want. You can probably write your own sentences if you want to for the hook and the context background. You don't have to. You can put keywords here. No regulation here. But to save time, I totally recommend that the thesis statement will always be and here in the conclusion and introduction, that the sentence, a full sentence is written for the thesis statement. Do not attempt to leave this unfilled because without this sentence, again, you don't have a purpose for your paper. And how can you get that? Well, your brainstorm map usually will tell you how to speak it out or how to write it out or how to read it out. So by having a completed brainstorm map, you can read out the thesis statement by the topic bubble and the 3, for example, let's go back to here, the topic bubble and these 3 main ideas. So you have main idea 1, 2, and 3. What they will do is trigger a sentence structure that would allow you to express how many objectives are going to be talked about on the paper through your purpose statement, or a summary form, a shorter form of what your entire paper would be about and how many of those objectives will you cover. Now, in the main idea, you want to keep about 2 to 3 words that's going to move over to your main idea sentence. And why? Because your sentence is a branch of the thesis statement already. So you're going to borrow a lot of words from there. But these 2 or 3 keywords generally make the sentences unique, right? So everywhere here on the outline, whether it's section B, section C, and yes, section B and section C, they're going to also have 2 to 3 keywords, okay? And then secondly, the major detail, no matter if it's a major detail 1, 2 on each section, right? Notice how the numbers reset here as well because they're under new sections, subsections like B, okay? So let's say under section A, subsection 1 and 2, you want to have 4 to 6 keywords. You want to grow this more to make sure they're not synonyms. They're not, I'm not counting like articles like the, a, and an, and certain prepositions. I mean strong keywords that gives these major details an identity of their own. They're going to be separate sentences completely, but they'll still both connect to the main idea, which is connected to the thesis. Then next you have the minor details and the additional minor details. You only need about 7 to 9 keywords before you start exhausting the specifics, right? Because these are super specific and you might have more descriptive words. You'll notice that your adjectives and your adverbs, they might draw in a bit of the word counts, but you also want to make sure that if you have compound nouns like shoe store instead of store, you can throw that in to be more descriptive. You can use numbers. I wouldn't count numbers as a part of this count, like 1, 2, 3, and 4, because they're usually shortened down to a symbol. Instead of THREE, 3, you're going to write down the Arabic form of the number 3, like this. It takes up a single space, but doesn't require too much, but you still want to draw out more. So instead of saying, I went to store, with the number 2, of course, you'll say, went to shoe store. And then you might say at maybe the name of the mall, the Galleria, Dallas, or something like that. And usually these additional words, these adjectives, they are part of what we call a phrase. So if you can try to have 7 root words, root nouns, and verbs, right? Like study several hours instead of, just study long time, right? It's best to try to use stronger words in this group. And again, you can use 7 phrases, right? That'll get you about 14 to 15 words or so, but that still counts as a phrase. And what I mean by 7 to 9 keywords or phrases is words and phrases combined, okay? A mix of them or maybe one type, that's totally fine. And also using strong words that mean more, like extinction, a definite word that I would say we would say is very concrete. There's no other meaning for this word except, when we look at words like education, those words are a bit more broad, vague, doesn't offer a lot. But if I said secondary high school education, this will be a singular phrase, at least with 2 words in the word count, and then you can add more to it, okay? So keep this in mind of the word count. Once you have that, you can start developing your sentences just by looking at them. This is what makes good speakers. That keeps them, them on topic. It also gives them sentences to say where they don't have to continue looking at the paper. They could start looking at the crowd, telling their story, and then go back to the next key point and move on. But for writers, of course, this is the pathway for every sentence on the paper. Every sentence is plotted, no extra sentences, unless you really, really need that extra sentence. But no extra sentences will be processed on the paper without being on the outline first. And if we do like a count, right, we can already see that paragraph 1 is going to have more sentences than B and C. Probably the most important paragraph because mainly the most important details go first or ideas go first, and then all the supplementary information goes second, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sentences already in this group. And then here you have about 5 or maybe even more sentences, maybe somewhere around the same. That's okay to give each section the same amount of weight. But don't split up your major details to make new paragraphs unless you're writing really big research papers, right? Only for essay sized papers do you ever need to keep the sections together as a single paragraph. On extended essays, it's fine. Research papers are basically an extended version of the essay. Extended essays are very long. But a standard essay or a standard research paper, in this case, for a middle school class, will never be that long. And that will be all for now. And of course, if you have any questions, please reach out to my email. You can do other things like leaving a comment if comments are allowed. But yes, leaving me an email might be the best way. You can find me at marcus@skillexcel.com if you need to know more. All right, everyone, have a wonderful day and take care. Make sure that if you want to learn more in the future about writing or literature, feel free to follow my channel.